A single mother was scolded because her twin babies were crying, unaware the man beside her was. The cabin lights dimmed to a hushed glow as Flight 718 pushed through the night sky from Denver to New York. It was supposed to be quiet, the kind of red-eye flight where strangers cocoon themselves in silence, praying for a few hours of restless sleep before the morning chaos. But silence was not what Emma Morgan carried with her. Her arms shook beneath the weight of two tiny bodies, pressed close against her chest. Liam and Lucy, just 6 months old, fought against her hold with red faces and wet cheeks. One began to whimper, then the other followed, their cries doubling in force until the cabin air felt thick with it. Emma's heart pounded as if her shame alone was loud enough to join them. She had boarded exhausted, hair tied back in a loose knot, shirt sticking to her skin from sweat, yet diaper bag heavier than it had ever been. She hadn't eaten properly in hours. The pacifiers, the only things that might have helped, had slipped somewhere beneath the seat during boarding. She couldn't reach them now without letting one of her babies go. Across the aisle, a woman snapped her head around, muttering under her breath as though Emma wasn't 3 feet away. 2 rows up, a man yanked his noise-canceling headphones tighter, glaring for just a second too long. A teenager rolled his eyes and pressed his phone screen brighter, as if volume alone would erase the sound. No one tried to hide their frustration. Emma kept whispering, rocking, bouncing, praying. "Please, please stop," she begged into the crown of Lucy's tiny head. Her words dissolved into the crying. Her shirt was damp with tears, hers and theirs. The plane rattled through the night and the judgment grew heavier. Her seatbelt hung loose around her waist. She hadn't even managed to buckle it properly before the chaos began. The aisle around her felt like a stage, every gaze sharpening into a verdict. She had never felt so alone. "Ma'am?" The word cut through like a blade. Emma froze and looked up. A flight attendant stood over her, clipboard clutched like a gavel, gray bob neat and rigid, expression carved in glass. The kind of woman who spoke and expected obedience before the sentence was finished. "You need to control your children now." Emma's lips parted, but nothing came out. Her twins screamed on, one in each arm, and the world tilted around her. I'm trying," she whispered. "They're teething and—" "No excuses," the attendant snapped, leaning down just far enough to remind Emma of her authority. "This is a quiet flight. People paid good money to rest. If this continues, I'll have to report you to the captain." Heat flooded Emma's face, shame licking up her neck until she felt trapped inside her own skin. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to trade places with anyone else in the cabin who sat comfortably without 2 babies clawing at their collarbones. She pressed her forehead against Liam's small head, whispering again through gritted teeth, "I'm doing my best." The attendant's eyes narrowed. She leaned close, so low Emma could feel the coldness of her breath. "Your best," she whispered, "is ruining this flight." Emma's throat closed. The weight of her babies dragged her down. The weight of the words crushed her spirit. She scanned the rows for help, for sympathy, for even one face that looked kind. Nothing. Every head turned away. Every gaze avoided hers. It was as if the entire cabin had silently agreed that she was the villain tonight. Her arms trembled harder, her heart beat loud enough to drown the engine hum. She thought she might break. And then it happened. From seat 4C, a man who had been silent since the plane left the runway shifted. Hoodie pulled up, tray table lowered, carry-on tucked beneath his feet. No one had noticed him, no one had given him more than a passing glance. But now, slowly, his hand reached up. A soft chime echoed as his finger pressed the call button overhead. The aisle fell silent, every eye lifted toward him. Emma felt her breath catch. For the first time since boarding, the noise in the cabin was no longer just her children's. Something else had shifted. If stories like this hold your attention, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. The younger flight attendant appeared almost instantly, confusion flickering on her face as she leaned toward him. The man didn't smile. He didn't whisper. He simply said, "I'd like to switch seats. I think that mother needs some help." And with that, the entire plane turned to look at Emma again. Only this time, the silence carried a different weight. Who was this man, and why was he stepping forward when no one else had? The younger flight attendant blinked, caught off guard by the request. Most passengers press the call button for water, blankets, or complaints, not to step into someone else's burden. "Sir?" she asked. "I'd like to change seats," the man repeated, his voice low but firm. "I think that mother needs some help." The surrounding rows grew still. Emma felt her pulse in her ears. For a moment, she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. Help? No one on that plane had looked at her with anything but irritation. The attendant hesitated. Well, But the man was already standing, hoodie draped loosely over broad shoulders, no jewelry, no pretension. Just a quiet determination as he stepped into the aisle and moved toward her row. Emma's eyes darted upward, startled. He stopped beside her, gaze steady but not invasive. His hands were slightly outstretched. Would it help if I held one of them? He asked. Her instinct flared. Strangers and children didn't mix. Not in airports, not in the middle of the night, not when trust could cost too much. Yet her arms ached, her back screamed, and Liam was slipping fast, his cries peaking in frantic bursts. I can take him, the man said gently, motioning toward the boy. Only if you're comfortable. Emma's body resisted, but her exhaustion overruled. Slowly she nodded. The man leaned down and scooped Liam up with surprising ease, cradling him against his chest. He didn't bounce or shush in high-pitched tones. He simply held the child steady, rocking with a rhythm as natural as breathing. And something happened. Liam's cries faltered. He blinked through wet lashes, fists still tight but body loosening bit by bit. His sobs thinned into soft whimpers until silence finally settled over him. The shift was immediate. The tension that had suffocated the aisle cracked open. Passengers who had stared daggers now looked on with disbelief. Emma's throat tightened. How did you do that? She whispered, unable to mask her shock. I didn't, the man said quietly, eyes still on Liam. He just needed a break. So did you. Emma's chest shook with a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time that night, she leaned back into the seat, not because she was relaxed, but because her body simply couldn't fight anymore. From the corner of her eye, she saw the younger attendant watching, almost smiling. But then the older one returned, the same sharp figure who had scolded her earlier. Her eyes narrowed. Sir, passengers aren't allowed to switch seats mid-flight. It's against policy. Emma stiffened, heat rushing back to her cheeks. She braced for another blow of humiliation. The man didn't flinch. He shifted Liam slightly in his arms and turned his head toward the attendant, gaze calm, unshaken. She didn't ask me to, he replied evenly. I offered. That doesn't matter, the attendant snapped. Policy is policy. His lips curved just faintly, not quite a smile, more like the recognition of a challenge. Is it? He said softly. Because I know that policy handbook. The attendant's posture wavered. He tilted his head, voice steady, but with an edge of steel. I helped write it. Gasps rippled quietly from nearby rows. The woman's face flushed. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then stepped back without another word. The authority she had wielded so confidently minutes earlier seemed to crumble in the space between them. Emma stared, too stunned to speak. The man lowered himself into the seat beside her, Liam resting peacefully against his chest now, eyes heavy with sleep. The cabin slowly returned to its previous hush, though this silence carried something new, an undercurrent of curiosity. People leaned ever so slightly, trying to catch more without daring to intrude. Emma shifted Lucy in her arms, still fussy but calmer than before. Her gaze fell to the tray table in front of her. A plain white card sat there. She hadn't seen him place it. Clean design, embossed lettering. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. The name stared back at her. Executive Office. Her breath caught. Clarion wasn't just an airline. It was the airline. One of the biggest carriers in the country, a household name. And this man, this stranger who had rocked her child to sleep and silenced the woman who had humiliated her, was not simply another passenger. Emma's heart raced. She looked up at him again, still holding her son as though he belonged there, as though the chaos of the flight had never touched him. Andrew Clark, Executive Office, Clarion. Nothing about this made sense, but she knew one thing with sudden clarity: this man was far more than he seemed. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, instructing passengers to prepare for descent. The cabin stirred as belts clicked, trays folded, and bags shifted under seats. Amid the motion, Emma sat rigid, her fingers tight around the business card that still felt heavier than its weight. Andrew Clark, Executive Office, Clarion. Her eyes moved from the embossed letters to the man seated beside her. Liam rested soundly in his arms, small chest rising and falling against the hoodie. Andrew's expression hadn't changed. Calm, steady, not self-important. Nothing about him screamed power, and yet the silence of the older flight attendant still lingered as proof. Emma reached for her son. But Andrew shifted carefully, adjusting the harness with deliberate patience. He'll need to be buckled in, he said softly. His tone wasn't commanding, more matter of fact, the way someone might say water is wet. He clicked the straps in place and leaned back as though he'd done it countless times before. "Thank you," Emma murmured, still catching up with the night. He glanced at her briefly, then back to Liam. "No thanks needed. Respect isn't optional, not on my flights." The words struck her. "My flights," they echoed louder than the captain's announcements. Emma turned the card over in her palm, the embossed name gleaming faintly under the cabin lights. "Executive office," she whispered to herself, testing the weight of the phrase. "Clarion." Her pulse picked up. Clarion wasn't just another airline. It was the largest carrier she knew of, the one with commercials on every screen, sponsorships plastered across stadiums, a company people envied but rarely touched. "You work for Clarion?" she asked finally, her voice cautious. Andrew turned toward her, eyes steady. "I do." Her lips parted. "So you're a lawyer? Or some kind of director?" He didn't smile this time. He simply shook his head. "Not exactly." Emma studied him, exhaustion mixing with disbelief. "Then what?" "I'm the CEO," he said. The words landed harder than the jolt of the landing gear beneath them. For a moment, Emma thought she'd misheard. The man in a hoodie, the man who held her baby like it was second nature, the man who stood up when no one else did. He was that man. The one who signed policies, who made headlines, whose name lived in stock reports. Her chest tightened. She blinked at him, wide-eyed. "You're the CEO?" she whispered, unable to say it louder. Andrew nodded once. No arrogance, no flourish, just truth. The engines roared as the plane tilted toward the runway. Emma's mind spun faster than the descent. The scene replayed in her head, the scolding, the whispers, the way the senior flight attendant had recoiled when he pushed back. Of course she had. She hadn't been arguing with another passenger. She'd been arguing with the man at the very top. Emma pressed Lucy closer to her chest, as if holding her daughter might anchor her. She wanted to laugh or cry or both. Instead, she whispered the only words that made it past her lips. "I don't understand. Why here? Why now?" Andrew's gaze remained forward, but his words carried enough weight to still the air between them. "Because when complaints stack up, I need to see what's happening without anyone polishing the truth for me. This wasn't a test. It was an opportunity to see how my staff behaves when they think no one's watching." The engines roared louder, the plane rattling as it dropped lower into the night. Emma's thoughts tangled in disbelief. This wasn't a test. The way he said it made her realize this moment was more than coincidence. Passengers around them continued buckling, whispering, shifting impatiently for landing. But Emma's world had shrunk to two realities, the babies in her arms and the billionaire seated beside her. Her embarrassment from earlier twisted into something else now. Confusion, wonder, even suspicion. What did this mean for her? For the flight attendant who had shamed her? For the silence of every passenger who had watched and done nothing? The wheels screeched against the runway, sending a shiver up the cabin. People exhaled, already reaching for overhead bins. The landing had happened, but Emma barely noticed. Her focus was still on the card in her palm, her heartbeat refusing to slow. She turned her head slowly, eyes locking with Andrew's. His expression was unreadable, calm yet firm, as though he already carried the answer to questions she hadn't asked. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out. "So what happens now?" The seatbelt light blinked off, and the cabin erupted in its usual chaos. Overhead bins slamming open, passengers jostling into the aisle, rushing to escape the plane as if freedom waited just beyond the gate. Emma didn't move. She sat frozen, Lucy pressed to her chest, Liam stirring softly against her shoulder. Her duffel bag, overstuffed and sagging, loomed in the compartment above her head like another burden waiting to collapse. Andrew stood first. He didn't push his way into the line of impatient passengers. Instead, he reached up, tugged the duffel free with one hand, and slung it over his shoulder. He bent for the diaper bag too, securing it without a word. When Emma finally lifted her gaze, his steady eyes met hers. "I can take these," he said. Her instinct bristled. She wasn't used to anyone carrying her weight. But her arms ached from holding the twins, and the thought of struggling down the narrow aisle with both children and bags made her throat close. She gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt too small for what he was doing. They moved together, not hurried like the others, but at their own pace. When they stepped into the terminal, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than the cabin glow, the space colder, more impersonal. Streams of travelers surged around them, rolling suitcases clattering, voices rising as tired bodies pushed toward baggage claim and exits. Emma clutched Lucy tighter, the diaper bag bouncing against Andrew's side as he walked beside her. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone casual, not probing. Emma hesitated, then admitted, "Queens. My cousin said I could stay for a while." "You sound unsure," Andrew observed. She gave a bitter laugh. "I am. She didn't exactly invite me with open arms. It's a couch, maybe a couple nights. Depends on how long her patience lasts." His eyes flicked toward her, not with pity, but with the weight of someone actually listening. "And after that?" Emma swallowed. "I don't know. I couldn't stay in Denver. Rent was eating everything. Daycare was impossible, and I was already on the edge of eviction. This was the only chance left. Get to New York, see if family still means family." Andrew didn't comment. He didn't offer hollow reassurances or polished words. He simply walked beside her in silence, holding the duffel like it was nothing while her entire life sagged inside it. At baggage claim, the carousel spun with dented suitcases and overstuffed duffels. Emma spotted hers, a faded navy bag with seams fraying, the zipper bent from years of pulling too tight. She stepped forward, but Andrew was already there, lifting it free and setting it gently by her side. "You don't have to," she began. "I know," he said, meeting her eyes, "but I want to." Her chest tightened. She wasn't used to help coming without strings. Together they made their way outside. The night air hit sharp and damp, horns blaring from the taxi line, where yellow cabs stacked bumper to bumper. The twins stirred, fussing softly against her, exhaustion threatening to spill into another storm. Emma shifted Lucy, trying to calm her, but her body screamed for rest. Andrew raised a hand, signaling a cab. One pulled forward instantly. He placed the duffel and diaper bag in the trunk, then opened the back door. Emma hesitated at the curb, clutching both children. "You've already done more than enough." Andrew shook his head. "No, I've done what should have been done from the start." He pressed the edge of the business card into her free hand again. "If you need anything, housing, work, even just someone to call, I meant it. That number is real. Use it." Emma stared at the card, her pulse racing. Billionaire executives didn't stand on curbs with single mothers and hand out lifelines. It felt surreal, almost fragile, as if one wrong word might break the spell. "I don't want to be anyone's problem," she murmured. "You're not," Andrew replied firmly. His voice left no space for argument. "You matter. Don't forget that." Her throat tightened, tears threatening, but she bit them back. She slid into the taxi, buckled the twins as best she could, and gave the driver her cousin's address in Queens. Andrew closed the door gently. Hands in his pockets, he stood at the curb as the cab pulled into traffic, his figure growing smaller in the rear window. Emma leaned her head against the glass, her body trembling with fatigue, her heart caught somewhere between disbelief and fragile hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one truth settled inside her. Tonight had changed something. She clutched the business card in her lap, embossed letters catching the passing streetlights. Andrew Clark, CEO, Clarion. She had no idea just how much her life had shifted. The taxi slowed in front of a worn brick apartment building in Queens. A flickering porch light buzzed above the entrance, barely cutting through the shadows. Emma shifted Lucy against her shoulder, fished out crumpled bills from her pocket, and handed them to the driver. More cash than she should have spent, but she had no choice. The door opened after the third buzz. Carla, her cousin, stood in the narrow frame, hair tied in a messy bun, expression heavy with reluctance. "You finally made it," Carla muttered, glancing at the twins strapped to Emma's chest and hip. "It's late." "I know," Emma said softly. "The flight was—" She stopped herself. There was no point explaining. "Thanks for letting us stay." Carla stepped back, waving her inside. The apartment smelled of reheated food and cigarette smoke. Piles of laundry were scattered on the couch, fast food wrappers stacked on the coffee table. The air felt thick, unwelcoming. "That's where you can sleep," Carla said, pointing to the couch without moving the clothes. "Just a couple of nights, all right? I wasn't planning on this long term." Emma nodded, throat tight. "Of course, just a couple nights." She set the duffel down and gently laid Lucy beside Liam on a blanket she spread over the cushions. Both babies fussed, small cries filling the cramped space. Carla groaned. "Can you keep them quiet? My roommate works early. She's already not happy about this." "I'll try," Emma whispered. She scooped them up again, bouncing gently, her arms burning with fatigue. When Carla disappeared into her room, Emma sat on the edge of the couch, rocking both babies at once, biting her lip hard enough to taste blood. Tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't. Not in front of her children. Hours dragged by. Liam cried again near midnight, his wails piercing the thin walls. Emma muffled him against her shirt, praying Carla wouldn't storm out. Lucy stirred soon after, adding her voice to the night. Emma pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from sobbing with them. Every squeak of the mattress springs felt like a warning that she didn't belong here, that she was a burden, an intruder, a noise no one wanted to endure. Her inner voice whispered harsh truths. You're failing. You've run out of places. You're a guest on borrowed patience. And you don't know how long before even this runs out. But under the shame, a stubborn fire flickered. You will not give up. You will not let them see you collapse. If you have to fight for every hour of shelter, you'll do it. For Liam, for Lucy. Emma lay on the couch at dawn, eyes raw from sleeplessness, twins finally dozing in her arms. Her back ached from the cramped cushions, her chest heavy with exhaustion, but she whispered to herself, we'll get through this. Across the city, another light burned, this one in a high-rise office tower in Midtown. Andrew Clark sat at his desk, the skyline stretched behind him like a silent witness. His jacket hung over the back of the chair, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He should have gone home hours ago, but the flight lingered in his mind. On the screen in front of him, passenger service reports scrolled in neat lines of text. Flight 718 had already generated multiple notes. 2 passengers had submitted complaints about the older flight attendant's harsh treatment of the woman with twin babies. Emma Morgan's name appeared twice in bold, linked to those accounts. Andrew leaned back, rubbing his temple. He had flown countless times, seen countless faces, but hers lingered. Not because she had asked for help, she hadn't. Not because she had sought sympathy, she hadn't. But because she had endured humiliation in silence until breaking was her only option. And the staff, who should have extended compassion, had instead turned the night into a trial. He couldn't let it slide. Not this time. Andrew tapped a note into the system, flagging the attendant for formal review. His fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than necessary, debating. This wasn't just about policy. It was about principle. He closed his laptop and stared out the window. His reflection met him in the glass. Hoodie traded for a shirt now, the weight of responsibility etched into his features. Emma Morgan was more than a line in a report. She was a reminder, a mirror of the struggles his own mother had faced when he was too young to understand, but old enough never to forget. He picked up the business card box from his desk, thumb running over the embossed lettering identical to the one he had handed her. He meant what he said. If she called, he'd answer. If she didn't, he'd find another way. Because what happened on Flight 718 wasn't just a breach of policy. It was a failure of dignity. And Andrew Clark wasn't about to ignore it. Morning crept into the small Queen's apartment like an unwelcome guest. Emma stirred on the couch, her neck stiff from the awkward angle, her arms heavy from a night of juggling 2 restless infants. Carla's door was already closed again. The only sound came from the dull hum of the refrigerator and the soft whimpers of Lucy shifting against her mother's chest. Emma eased herself upright, careful not to wake Liam, who slept curled on the folded blanket beside her. Her phone buzzed on the armrest. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Most calls weren't worth answering. Bill collectors, spam, wrong numbers. But something made her swipe. Hello? Her voice cracked, raw from fatigue. A pause. Then a steady, familiar voice. Emma, it's Andrew, from the flight. Her heart thumped hard. She shifted Lucy in her arms, suddenly alert. Oh, hi. I hope I'm not intruding, he said. I asked our passenger services team for your contact. I wanted to check in. She frowned. You what? I meant what I said last night, Andrew continued. If you need help, real help, not handouts, not pity, I want to meet. Can we talk? Emma looked down at her children. Her first instinct was resistance. People didn't just follow up like this. Not people like him. I don't know. I'll come to you, Andrew said calmly, as if he already sensed her hesitation. Where are you today? Her voice came out softer than she intended. A church pantry in Brooklyn. They sometimes have diapers. Text me the address, Andrew said. I'll be there. She wanted to say no. She wanted to hang up and pretend the call never came. But something in his tone, direct, grounded, disarmed her. Against her better judgment, she sent the address. The church pantry was tucked into a brick building with peeling paint and a sagging sign. Inside, folding tables lined the room, stacked with canned food, formula samples, and boxes of diapers donated from who knows where. Other mothers stood in line, their eyes carrying the same exhaustion Emma felt. She pushed the stroller she'd borrowed from Carla's neighbor, one wheel wobbling with every step. Lucy and Liam fussed, but the sound blended with the cries and chatter echoing through the hall. Emma kept her head down, filling a paper bag with formula packets, when she saw him. Andrew Clark. Hoodie gone, replaced with a pressed shirt and rolled sleeves. No entourage, no bodyguards. Just him, standing awkwardly near the back of the room, holding 2 steaming coffees. Emma blinked, stunned. "You actually came. I told you I would." He stepped forward, offering one of the cups. "You look like you haven't slept," her lips curved in a weak smile. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there," he said. She accepted the coffee, its warmth seeping into her hands. For a moment, she felt human again, not just survival on 2 legs. They sat outside on a cracked wooden bench, a stroller parked in front of them, both twins finally asleep. Steam curled into the cool air as Andrew leaned forward. "I'd like to offer you something," he began. Emma tensed. Offers always came with strings. "What kind of something?" "Transitional housing," he said simply. "We run a pilot program for single parents through one of my foundations. It's private, safe, and fully covered. You'd have your own space, no roommates, no couches." Her eyes narrowed. "So you're offering me charity?" "No," Andrew replied, shaking his head. "I'm offering you dignity." The word cut through her like a blade. She blinked, defensive. "Nothing's free. I've learned that the hard way." "This isn't about free," Andrew said firmly. "It's about a chance to breathe. You're carrying 2 children alone, Emma. That isn't weakness, it's strength. But even strength needs a place to rest." She looked away, chewing her lip. "Why me? You don't even know me." Andrew's gaze softened. "Because I watched you fight for those children while everyone else judged you. You didn't ask for pity. You didn't beg for favors. You just kept going. That tells me enough." Silence stretched between them. Emma's hands tightened around the coffee cup, mind whirling. A stranger, a CEO, an offer that sounded too good to be true. Lucy stirred in the stroller, her tiny hand twitching in her sleep. Emma exhaled, the weight of exhaustion pressing down again. She whispered, "And if I say no? Then I'll respect that," Andrew said. "But the door will stay open. You can call me tomorrow, next week, next month. The offer won't vanish." Emma looked at him then, really looked. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just the man who had rocked her son to sleep on a plane when no one else dared to care. Her chest ached with something between fear and relief. She wasn't ready to trust, but she wasn't ready to walk away either. Emma didn't answer Andrew right away. The word housing echoed too loudly in her head, crashing against every wall she'd built from years of disappointment. Promises never held, offers never stayed, help always came with a bill. But then Liam stirred in the stroller, his tiny fists twitching in his sleep, and Lucy whimpered softly. Emma knew she had run out of choices. Her cousin's couch was already disappearing under resentment. The shelter list would take weeks, months even. She couldn't keep dragging the twins from doorstep to doorstep. She lifted her eyes to Andrew. His expression was steady, unpressured, like he had all the time in the world for her to decide. "All right," she whispered finally. "I'll try it." Relief softened his features, but he didn't gloat. He only nodded once. "Let's go." The drive to Astoria was quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the car and the occasional fuss from the babies in the back seat. Emma stared out the window, watching the city blur past. She held the business card tight in her hand as though it might vanish if she let it go. When the car pulled up in front of a restored brownstone, Emma blinked in disbelief. The building glowed softly under warm lights, the paint fresh, windows trimmed with clean white frames. It didn't look like the kind of place someone like her belonged. Andrew opened the trunk, lifted her duffel, and carried it up the steps without a word. Emma followed, clutching both twins, her chest tightening with every step. Inside, the space opened into a modest apartment. But to Emma, it looked palatial. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath her feet. The kitchen counters shone, lined with neatly arranged staples, cereal, bread, fresh fruit. The refrigerator hummed softly, already stocked with milk, juice, eggs, and vegetables. She turned into the bedroom and stopped cold. A crib stood by the wall, complete with folded blankets, diapers stacked neatly on the dresser, formula tucked into the corner. In the second bedroom, a twin-sized bed sat ready, sheets crisp and clean. Emma's knees buckled. She lowered Lucy into the crib and sank onto the edge of the bed, covering her face with both hands. For the first time in months, the tears came, not of humiliation, not of defeat, but of release. Relief crashed over her like a tide, breaking down the armor she'd carried for too long. Her shoulders shook. Quiet sobs spilled into the quiet room until she could no longer stop them. Andrew lingered near the doorway, duffel still in his hand. He didn't step closer. He didn't fill the silence with platitudes. He simply stood, giving her the space to let go. When her breathing finally slowed, Emma lifted her head, eyes raw but lighter. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Andrew replied. He set the bag down and leaned against the doorframe. This isn't a favor, it's a reset. 6 months, longer if needed. No rent, no catch, just breathing room. Emma shook her head, still struggling to believe. People don't just do this. They should, Andrew said simply. His tone carried no boast, no grandeur. You deserve more than surviving night to night. She pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting another wave of tears. For so long, survival had been the only goal. Keeping the twins fed, finding the next roof, stretching every dollar until it snapped. Hope felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. But sitting here, surrounded by proof that someone saw her as worthy of more than pity, something shifted. She looked down at Lucy, sleeping peacefully in the crib, and then at Liam, curled against the blanket. For once, they weren't on the floor of a noisy apartment or crammed into her arms on a plane. They were safe. Emma exhaled shakily, whispering almost to herself, "Maybe we'll be okay." Andrew's voice answered from the doorway, calm but firm. "You will be." The evening stretched quiet. Andrew eventually stepped out, leaving Emma with the keys, a number to call if anything broke, and a fridge stocked for days. She stood at the window, watching him disappear into the city, the weight in her chest finally lifting enough for her to breathe. She touched the keys in her hand. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't wondering where she would sleep tomorrow. Miles away, Andrew slid into the back of his car, phone already buzzing. He glanced at the screen. It was his assistant. "Sir," came the voice over the line, "about the report from Flight 718. The disciplinary review for the senior attendant has been scheduled. They're expecting your input." Andrew's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to the city, rushing past the window. "Good," he said quietly. "I'll be there." He ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket. Back in the brownstone, Emma curled on the bed beside her children, unaware that while her world had just begun to shift into light, the shadow of that night's cruelty was about to face its reckoning. 2 days later, Emma sat at the small kitchen table of the brownstone apartment, Lucy balanced against her chest while Liam dozed in the crib. She sipped lukewarm tea, trying to gather the courage to face another day. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't worrying about where to sleep, but uncertainty still pressed on her shoulders like a second weight. The knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, Andrew stood there. No hoodie this time. Dark suit, tie loosened, but the same steady calm in his eyes. "Emma," he said, lowering his voice, "I need to ask you for something." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" "There's an internal review tomorrow," he said, "about what happened on Flight 718. The senior flight attendant is facing a disciplinary hearing. They'll ask for statements. I'd like you to be there." Emma's chest tightened. "Me? No. I can't. I don't want to be." She faltered, clutching Lucy tighter. "I don't want to be the mom who complained. That's not who I am." Andrew shook his head. "You're not that. You're the mother who was humiliated in front of a cabin full of people who stayed silent. If you don't speak, this becomes another file in a drawer." Her eyes flicked away. "I don't want the attention. I just want to move on." His gaze didn't waver. "Your silence lets this happen again, to the next mother, the next father, anyone who doesn't fit the profile of who they think deserves respect." Emma swallowed hard. His words carried weight because she knew he was right. Still, the thought of sitting in a room full of executives of being dissected like evidence made her knees weak. "I'll be there with you," Andrew said. "You won't stand alone." The next afternoon, Emma found herself in a sleek glass conference room at Clarion's Manhattan headquarters. The skyline stretched beyond the windows, glittering with powers she had never touched before. A reflection stared back at her from the polished table, hair pulled back, dark circles under her eyes, Lucy resting quietly in her arms. Across from her sat a panel of Clarion executives, men and women in sharp suits with notepads poised. The senior flight attendant sat stiffly at the far end of the table, eyes fixed anywhere but Emma. Andrew entered last, nodding once to Emma before taking his seat at the head of the table. The room hushed instantly. "Thank you all for being here," Andrew began. His voice was steady but carried an edge. "We are here to address conduct unbecoming of our staff, specifically an incident on Flight 718. Ms. Emma Morgan has agreed to share her experience. I expect full attention." Emma's heart pounded. She glanced down at Lucy, who stirred faintly against her. Every instinct told her to shrink, to keep quiet. But then she remembered the hissed words. "Your best is ruining this flight." She remembered the glares, the silence of the cabin. She lifted her head. "I didn't want to be here," she began, her voice low but clear. "I didn't want to make noise. But I was holding 2 babies that night, and instead of help, I was treated like I was ruining everyone's comfort. I was told my best wasn't enough, and no one stood up, except one person. The room stilled. Even the executives who had begun jotting notes stopped mid-sentence. Emma continued, her voice trembling but steadying with every word. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I wasn't asking for pity. I just needed a moment to breathe. But instead, I was spoken to like I didn't belong, like my children didn't belong. That isn't just unkind, it's dangerous, because the next time it won't just be humiliation, it'll be something worse. She paused, pressing her lips together. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air system. Andrew's gaze locked on her, unwavering. Thank you, Emma, he said quietly. An executive cleared her throat. The behavior you described is unacceptable under our code of conduct. She turned toward the flight attendant. Do you dispute this account? The woman's jaw tightened. I was maintaining order. No, Andrew cut in sharply, his voice rising for the first time. You were humiliating a paying passenger in front of an entire cabin. That isn't order. That's arrogance. The attendant's face flushed, her protests crumbling under the weight of the room. The panel murmured among themselves, pens moving again. One executive leaned forward. Emma, your testimony will be recorded. It will become central to this review. Is there anything else you'd like documented? Emma swallowed, glancing down at Lucy's sleeping face. For once, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like background noise to be hushed away. She felt heard. Her throat tightened. Just this, she whispered. No parent should be made to feel ashamed for trying their best. Ever. The words lingered like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the room. Andrew leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable, but eyes fierce. He didn't need to add anything. Emma's words had already carried more weight than any policy statement could. When the meeting adjourned, Emma stepped out of the room, her legs shaky but her chest lighter. Andrew walked beside her. You did more than you think, he said. Emma glanced at him. I didn't want to. Which is why it mattered even more, Andrew replied. For the first time in years, Emma realized she hadn't just survived another day. She had changed it. The review was over, but the weight of it lingered on Emma's chest as she walked out of the building. She still felt out of place in Clarion's glass headquarters, where every reflection seemed to highlight how little she belonged. But Andrew didn't treat her like an outsider. He walked beside her, silent, letting her breathe. Outside, the city roared. Horns, footsteps, voices clashing in rhythm. Emma shifted Lucy in her arms, feeling the baby stir. Andrew gestured to a quiet corner bench near the plaza, away from the streams of executives rushing by. Sit, he said simply. She sank onto the bench, grateful to take the weight off her feet. Liam dozed in the stroller beside her, his small chest rising steadily. For the first time in days, Emma felt she wasn't carrying everything alone. Andrew sat down too, shoulders squared, eyes on the traffic, but voice soft. Do you know why I started programs like this? Emma glanced at him. Because you're rich enough to? His lips curved faintly. Money's only part of it. The truth is, I grew up watching my mother struggle. She was on her own, 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Rent barely covered. Some nights, dinner was just cereal. I saw the way people looked at her, the way they dismissed her. She carried battles no one noticed. Emma's chest tightened. She looked down at her hands. That sounds familiar. That's why I built outreach programs quietly through Clarion, Andrew continued. Transitional housing, childcare support, job placement. I never wanted them to be publicized. I wanted them to work, not to shine. Emma studied his profile, the sharp lines softened by the honesty in his voice. He wasn't boasting. He wasn't selling her anything. He was simply sharing a truth he rarely let anyone see. You reminded me of her, Andrew said after a pause. He turned to meet Emma's gaze. Fighting battles no one saw, holding it together when the world expected you to fall apart. Her throat tightened. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. I didn't feel like I was holding it together. Not on that plane. You did, Andrew said firmly. Everyone else judged, you kept going. That's strength. Emma pressed her lips together, unsure what to say. For so long she had measured herself by survival, keeping the twins fed, keeping them warm, keeping them quiet enough to avoid eviction. Strength had never been how she described herself. But hearing it now, from him, it stirred something she hadn't felt in years. Worth. Days settled into a new rhythm. The brownstone apartment gave her space to breathe. She woke on a real bed, fed her children without rationing portions, and walked them in a neighborhood where she wasn't ashamed to be seen. One afternoon, Emma sat at the small desk tucked by the window, the twins napping nearby. A laptop Andrew's team had provided glowed before her. She scrolled through job postings: administrative assistant, receptionist, part-time bookkeeping. For once, she wasn't applying in panic, typing from a phone in a noisy shelter. She was applying with a roof over her head and the quiet confidence that tomorrow wouldn't collapse under her feet. Each click felt like reclaiming ground she had lost long ago. Andrew checked in occasionally, never overstepping. Sometimes he dropped by with groceries, sometimes just a short text. "How are the kids?" Always steady, never intrusive. And every time, Emma felt the bond deepening. Not of romance, not of dependency, but of respect. He treated her as an equal, not a case file. She wasn't invisible to him. One evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, Andrew stopped by after a long day at headquarters. Emma had just put Liam down in the crib, Lucy curled in her arms. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Andrew lingered by the doorway. His suit jacket was draped over his arm, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but his eyes carried the same steadiness as always. "You're doing it," he said softly. Emma frowned. "Doing what?" "Building again, piece by piece." She shifted Lucy gently, her lips curving into the smallest smile. "I'm trying." "That's all it takes," Andrew said. He turned toward the door, ready to leave, but paused. His hand rested lightly on the frame. He looked back at her, his voice low enough to settle deep. "You're not invisible, Emma. Not anymore." The words rooted her to the spot, powerful in their simplicity. When the door clicked shut behind him, Emma stood still, Lucy breathing softly against her chest, her heart pounding with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she believed him. Weeks slipped into months. The brownstone no longer felt like borrowed space. It felt like a home. Emma settled into its rhythm. Morning walks with the twins in the stroller, afternoons filling out job applications at the small desk by the window, evenings spent cooking real meals instead of surviving on whatever came from a pantry line. The babies flourished in the quiet. Liam's laugh came easier now, no longer strained from nights of constant crying. Lucy began sitting up on her own, tiny fists pounding triumphantly on the soft crib mattress. Their cheeks grew fuller, their sleep longer. The weight Emma had carried since their birth began to loosen, not because life had become effortless, but because it had finally become livable. One morning, she folded the final version of her resume into an envelope. Her first real interview was scheduled at a medical office in Midtown. She caught herself smiling in the mirror, tired still, yes, but not broken. The woman staring back wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to step forward. Across the city, Andrew moved through a different kind of transformation. The internal review from Flight 718 had ignited something larger than one reprimand. What happened on that red-eye flight was no longer just a passenger complaint. It became a case study. Clarion's leadership-approved sweeping reforms Andrew had pushed forward. Every flight attendant, pilot, and staff member would now undergo mandatory compassion and dignity training. Designed not by consultants with glossy slides, but by people who had lived the very struggles passengers carried. Andrew insisted on it. He stood in the boardroom and told them plainly, "Respect is not optional. Not when people put their trust in us 30,000 feet above the ground. Not ever." The executives signed off. The program began. And though the press releases celebrated Clarion's new direction, the public never knew the spark had been a mother in seat 17B with twins in her arms and no strength left to fight. Emma's name remained unknown. Her story lived quietly inside the reforms. Emma didn't care about headlines. What mattered was what she felt each time she laid her children down in the crib, each time she stretched out on a mattress instead of a couch, each time she opened her laptop and searched for opportunities without the dread of another eviction notice. She often thought back to that night, the glares, the scolding voice, the moment she thought she would collapse. And then the stranger beside her, hoodie pulled tight, quietly standing up when no one else did. She realized now it hadn't been charity that changed her life. It had been respect. The rare kind that doesn't look at someone's circumstance and see a burden, but looks at their humanity and sees worth. That single act had given her something she hadn't known she was missing: dignity. On the morning of her interview, Emma dressed in her best, the blazer she'd kept folded at the bottom of her bag even when it made no sense to carry it. Liam fussed as she slipped him into the stroller beside Lucy, but quieted when she kissed the top of his head. "You two are coming with me," she whispered. "Mommy's got work to do." She wheeled them out into the city streets, the business card Andrew had given her still tucked safely in her purse. She hadn't called him in weeks, didn't want to lean on him for every step, but just knowing it was there gave her courage. At the corner, she stopped to breathe, watching the taxis flash by, the world busy and indifferent. And yet, she no longer felt invisible in it. She belonged here. That evening, as Emma rocked Lucy to sleep, she thought of the lesson carved into her heart by the man who had sat beside her on that long flight. Sometimes, the richest man in the room isn't the one with money. It isn't the CEO, the billionaire, or the one whose name is written across skyscrapers. It's the one who remembers what it means to be human. So if Emma's story touched you, make sure to like and subscribe. And tell me, if you were on that plane, would you have stood up for her or looked away?